I'm Jen Valenga, and this is the Ditch Your Backup Plan podcast. Come back every Monday to get the courage to ditch your backup plan, or if you never had a plan to begin with, come back to be inspired by those who have gone before you in arts and entertainment.
And I would say, especially with the college search process, don't get too hung up on your ego, because you'll miss your people. You'll miss your teachers. Don't say, that's my number one school, I've got to get in there and then my life will be happy. That's just absolutely not true.
Today's episode, number 36, features Vincent J. Cardinal. He is the Arthur E. and Martha S. Hearron Endowed Chair in Musical Theater at the University of Michigan, and my longtime mentor. It's Thanksgiving week, and whether you're listening in for the first time or the 36th, thank you. I really appreciate you listening in. I interviewed Vince in August, but I knew I wanted to save it for Thanksgiving week to say thank you for all the advice, support, and mentorship he's provided me over the years. I first met Vince as a graduate student at Ohio University. I was assigned to his production of Angels in America as the assistant director. I can remember sitting around the table, analyzing the script, and he was very open, encouraging everyone to give their perspective on the meaning and the actions behind each event within each scene. I had an idea, I decided to speak up, and I guess I was nervous or intimidated. Vince would probably laugh at that now. And I remember he said, if you have something to say, you need to speak up. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'm in grad school now. I need to just speak up. And I never stopped. When I graduated from Ohio University, there was a job open at the University of Miami where he had become the chair. We've worked together in many different scenarios, a lot of which you'll hear about in this episode. There are so many mentors I've had, but Vince was the first when it came to directing and becoming an educator. Long before him, I had mentors like Pam Riley, Ann Haywood, Kay Bircher, Cam Richards, and in my undergraduate program, Mel and Barbara Schroeder. This is a week to say thank you. I'm grateful for my parents for always supporting me, and my family, my husband and son, who never blink an eye, even when I ask them not to flush the toilet when I'm podcasting. Here's my interview with Vince Cardinal. Hi, Vince. How are you?
I'm good, Jen. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad to talk to you finally.
This is so great. I listen to all of these podcasts, so now that I'm actually in one, it's kind of surreal.
I love it. I've been waiting to have you on. You're probably the guest who's mentioned the most. You are the Arthur and Martha Hearron Endowed Professor of Musical Theater, Chair of the Department of Musical Theater, and Professor of Music at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at the University of Michigan.
Yes, you've done your homework. That's who I am. That's who I am right now anyway.
And what's so cool about having students listen to you, well, a number of Michigan students listen, but also you've been at Ohio University, University of Miami, University of Connecticut. You've been all over in lots of kinds of programs. So we'll get to that. But before we do, I want to ask, where are you calling from?
In Ann Arbor.
Ann Arbor, where University of Michigan is. So we're recording this the end of August. Are you ready?
I'm ready for the teaching to start. We are actually in musical theater doing the first 2 weeks completely online because 30,000 people are showing up to this little town, and we figure it'll take a little while for safety to settle in. Clearly, our priority is everyone's safety and then delivering this curriculum. But the kids are raring to go. Faculty took it as a great challenge and used the summer to figure out how this new medium serves. And so I actually think it's going to be really good in the areas we can control.
Yeah.
And those areas we can't, we just have to be really safe and hope others are doing the same.
Yeah, we're at higher risk in our, ventilation that we have. I don't know if you know this, but we've decided to go all podcasts. So we're doing a podcast and we're doing all radio plays. So we scrapped our season.
Oh, how cool.
We're all really excited. We're buying mics for all of our students, sending them home with them.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it makes you have to think creatively, which is what we do best.
Well, and I think we are the population who are poised to make the best of the whole situation, because for centuries, theater people have been adapting, including closed theaters and plagues, and we've always survived it. We'll keep pivoting and keep being really hopeful that it comes back to something healthier and better. My optimism is not to in any way discount the actual pain and suffering that's happening. It's just to say, in what we can control, we can do that well.
It makes you kind of wonder if you're doing the right thing by asking students to go into the profession. And yet, as long as you help them understand what they're going into, I think it's a good thing.
I do too, because actually what we're teaching is how to communicate and how to tell the human story. And we know that that's part of what it is to be human, is to need to speak to who we are and tell our story and our ancestors' story. And it's how we make order of the chaos that is life. And so whether you put it in a professional context or not, the need to tell the story will always be there. And the fact that we give people tools to tell that story better, perhaps with more nuance, with more levels, with more understanding, that's very valuable for humanity, whether we're making it an economic impact or we're just saying, let's get through this together. Tell me how you're doing. Tell me your story. So I never make an apology for what we do, because it is at the core of our humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always reminded at Ohio University when Ursula Belden was still with us and teaching there, and she always talked about going to graduation. I'm sure you know the story, how she went to graduation and there was someone who would always call her Dr. Belden, and she'd say, "Oh, I'm an MFA in design, in scenic design. I'm not a doctor." And he would always say to her, "But you're a doctor of the soul or spirit," or I don't remember the exact words, but
Yes.
I'm reminded of that a lot.
Yes. And I think that's where everyone gets confused or maybe doesn't trust their instinct when they think about going to university for any of the many aspects of theater, is they think of it as a vocational degree entirely. But then an English major is not thinking of their degree as a vocational degree. They really think that there is value in studying the literature and the story and how we express ourselves. And so I try to back people off from the vocational part of this, even though I know that's how we measure. I know that's some of the excitement and aspiration. But when we get down to the core, why are you spending your life doing this? There's a calling that's much greater than making a buck on Broadway or in a movie.
Yeah. So, Vince, what led you to become an educator? Because I know that you're a playwright and you're a published playwright and you went to Yale. Can you tell that origin story?
Sure. Well, both of my parents are educators. Going back to your off stated, you have to see it to be it. I think that's what I saw. And I understood it and I understood its value. I also had a calling to do theater before I knew what theater was. And because we didn't really, even though they were educators, they were not theater people. Going to the theater was not something we did as a family. In fact, I think we went to one movie my entire growing up.
Wow.
So that was not really in the cards, but I'm told, I don't remember this. My dear friend Lisa Kurtz reminds me that we would do plays in the garage before either of us had ever been to a play. We really didn't know what it was, but we would get neighborhood kids to come and watch us tell stories. So I think there's a calling before that. When I was very young, I was about 8 years old, and I stumbled into an audition. And from that audition got cast, and a wonderful woman, Mrs. Mills, Blanche Mills, called my parents and said that I had auditioned kind of by mistake. And she would be at the rehearsals and could I do this? And that got me into the theater. So I started that young. Dr. Erdman, Dr. Zucchero, James Thornton, all local people doing theater who made room for me and made it possible for me. And as I grew up, I got more involved and did publicity, did directing, did writing, and got to do the regional dinner theater and the Kent Acting and Touring Company. Just as a kid, just was working and working and working. When I got to college,
as an actor,
well, I fancied myself an actor. But at that point, I was doing dinner theater as an actor, and I got cast in the university production, and I couldn't do both things. And rightfully so. They shouldn't have said, this dinner theater thing you're doing will replace your educational show. But I said, because I knew everything at the time, that I was a professional actor and that I should do the professional show.
You've heard that before on the other end many times.
Oh, yeah. Now it's karma. I have that conversation, once a month. And so I switched majors to the only other thing I knew, which was education. And so I became an education major with a focus in English and psychology, and got my certification in secondary ed, which felt really comfortable and really good. And so that's where it started. Out of college, of course, we were not wealthy people, and I needed a job right away. So I started teaching high school right away.
Is that in Shaker Heights?
It was actually, my first job was in Kent, Ohio, and then I got a job in Shaker Heights. And I did that for a number of years, and that's where I had Michael McElroy as a student, and numerous other people who have gone on to really lovely careers. And I was so naive and I remember the day the Yale School of Drama catalog happened to be on the desk in one of the offices, and I picked it up, and I thought, oh, look, maybe I should apply to grad school. And I'm flipping through and I'm thinking, oh, I've been directing for a few years and I acted almost my whole life. And oh, look, I don't know anything about playwriting. I'll apply to Yale School of Drama's playwriting program. Talk about where angels fear to tread. No idea.
Yeah.
The thing that was so cool, though, was I had all these brilliant students in high school, and I had been writing for them because I couldn't find anything that sounded as smart or as funny as they were. So I was really just writing their voices and what they said. The genius was them. It certainly wasn't me. But I took the things I had been writing for them and they had inspired, and I submitted those to Yale and got in by some miracle with no idea that I would be the only non-playwright in my program. And there I was with, Lynn Nottage and numerous other people who went on to be famous playwrights. And I was just like, I've written some shows for high school kids.
But they saw something.
Well, and it was truly the generosity of, I think the only reason I had such an amazing experience was I was so open and so naive and just a sponge. Because I had nothing to show off with. And the people there were just so incredibly generous and willing to take the time. And I've got a great education with incredible mentors.
My favorite thing you tell students all the time is like 90% of it is showing up. And showing up, that's in all of its ways. It means actually physically being present and showing up. And I think you've done that. You've embodied that.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I agree with it. I think it takes a lot of humility. And I don't know that I had the humility as an undergraduate to do that. I think I needed the maturity because I didn't start graduate school until I was 27. You fall down a few times along the way between 18 and 27. And I think I was finally humble enough to shut up and listen and just accept that, yes, I could say, but I think, and share my wonderful opinion. But by the time I was 27, I knew that I would still have my opinion. I just was in a position to learn and to take in everything. I think one of the big lessons is I had come from a class with Arthur Miller, the playwright, and I was waiting for the piano lesson to get out. So I was sitting in the green room with August Wilson. And I was saying, but, you tell us this, and George Roy Hill tells us this, and Mr. Miller tells us this, and Mylon Stitt tells us this. And he said, learn all of it completely, because then you'll know what all of us learn. So you'll be greater in total than the individual.
Mm.
And that was so eye-opening to me. And of course, I'm not greater than any of them, but I do feel like I have perspectives from just shutting up and listening to them all.
Yeah, I guess I didn't know you went back to grad school later like that. I went back at 29, almost 30.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
But when I went, I thought, I'm going to be going down the hall going, what are the actors doing? What are the actors doing? And I didn't actually. I was more interested in what the designers were doing, but I didn't know that until I started.
Well, and that's the thing I love about graduate school in particular. There's so much going on. And if you can just let yourself relax and wander into as many rooms as possible, there is so much to learn. And I think what I did often in graduate school is it would drive me nuts to know that rehearsals were happening with amazing people. And so I would wander into these rehearsals and sit in the back and watch and learn so much. I would get kicked out fairly frequently. Those were technically closed rehearsals, but I would go ahead and sneak in anyway. And that's where the learning takes place. And to just sit in the back and open up in all, like the feeling of the room, what's working, what little gems are happening. And so I really try to, even though I'm a chairman, and part of the chairman's job is to sort of be the gatekeeper, my heart is always, get in the room, welcome.
We always said in grad school, and we would say, it's crazy. You walk into Vince's office wanting something, and you leave wanting the opposite, but feeling good about it. That's what we always said. You walk out wanting the exact opposite what you went in for, but you feel good about it. And so much of your leadership in academia is things I emulate. So I have to thank you for that.
Oh, well, yes, you're welcome. And it's interesting in terms of, I reflect on it listening to your podcast, because I look back and I think, those students are talking about when I was 36 years old.
Yeah.
Or those people were experiencing me when I was 42. And I think about my own growth as a human being and, my seasons of life as related to where those students met me along the way, and how I've changed and grown, and what a different set of energies and insights I bring to my job now versus then. And that's so eye-opening to me to hear them talk about it, because I was a different person 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what may have been a deficit and like too large of an ego was made up for maybe in the kind of energy and focus on exactly those students every day for 16 hours a day that I could do.
Oh, man, yeah.
And, you just change over time. And I think that's a real lesson. And I've learned it really through listening to your podcasts, that
cool.
Who an educator is changes with the seasons of their life. And you hope that your season is matching up with this generation's needs at any given time.
Yeah, I hadn't quite articulated that for myself, but it's really accurate, because sometimes I listen to their stories and I hope they don't remember it the way I do.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember all the mistakes for sure.
Of course, yeah.
All the things you wish you said better, the way you handled it, those are indelible, which then makes the positive stories a delight, because I don't remember any.
I know. Oh, gosh.
But you just hope that you've done, you've helped more than you've damaged. And, that your heart has stayed true to what you hope you've impacted people positively.
You just don't let things escalate if they don't need to be escalated. Mm. And I think that's a great lesson I've taken from you in your leadership.
Again, it depends on the season. I'm sure that I've thrown a tirade or two along the way that was probably not helpful. But I do think that in thinking about talking to you, this for everyone, I think in education, it's a two-way street in terms of knowing that a student doesn't have to love a teacher or how they go about their teaching to learn from them. And part of a student's job is to get everything out of that teacher possible, whether you think they're a jerk or not. What do they know and how do you take it forward is part of your job. As a teacher, your job is to try to meet every student where they are and stimulate them, challenge them to grow beyond that point and be as good of a bridge to the future as possible. So I think if everybody is doing their job, every student's learning along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And trying to be fair. I think that's students will always perceive what they perceive, but if you can sleep at night going, I think that was the fair. And fair doesn't mean equal necessarily. Equity and equality, those two things being different. We see a lot about that right now.
Absolutely.
Vince, what I want to ask is, did you have a backup plan? When you finished Yale, what did you think you'd be doing?
I did exactly what I thought I would be doing, which is before I graduated, Mylan Stitt, who was the chair of the department, said, you have to have a first-class off-Broadway or regional theater contract for a new play that you've written to get your degree.
Oh, gosh.
And everybody lost their mind,
Mm-hmm.
Because that's impossible. That's like 2 years of work.
Or more.
Yeah. Some of my classmates, called lawyers, and some just threw fits, and some just said, I'm not doing it. And everybody had their reaction. I went to one of our guest artists at the time and said, oh my gosh, what should we do? This is a really unreasonable expectation. And he said, what? He said, you have to do it to graduate? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, well, you should start writing. Which was the best advice.
Yeah, just show up.
Really, as artists, what you do to get out of a problem is you do your art form. And so I started writing, and I wrote this little 2-character play and did some readings of it and submitted it to a number of places. And Circle Rep, which was an off-Broadway theater at the time, did a reading of it, and then they did a workshop of it. I went to have a final reading of it the night of my graduation from Yale.
Mm-mm.
So technically, I didn't know whether I was walking for nothing or not. And after the reading, Lanford Wilson actually brought me a little diploma that they had made and told me that I would have a contract and I would be opening the next season off Broadway.
Amazing.
So I moved to New York City. I had that show open. I had several other gigs along the way, both as a director and a writer. I taught at NYU, and it was great. I enjoyed it. What was striking me the whole time was I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, which is I wanted to do theater every day. And I was really lucky. I was working comparatively, I was working all the time. But really, I wanted a life where I got to do theater every day because I really love theater.
Yeah.
And an opportunity came up at Buffalo State College. At that time, you could get a commuter flight to back and forth between Manhattan and Buffalo for $30.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Less than a bus ticket.
So I was commuting between New York and Buffalo, and it was great. And after a few years, Circle Rec invited me back to run the theater school there. So I went back to New York, ran the school, continued to work as a writer and ran the school and taught again at NYU. Then from there, I went back into full-time academia and ended up at Ohio University where I met you.
Yeah, probably like the youngest chairperson ever there or something.
Well, that's so funny to me because I think about that. And such great people there. That was a gathering of real forces in that little town. But I was so honored that they encouraged me to be the chairman. In retrospect, I just think nobody else wanted to do it.
Oh my gosh, totally. No one wants to do this terrible job.
But what a great way to enter academia with all of these seasoned people who really cared surrounding me. You learn what it is to be a chair. And I think all administrative jobs from the outside look like opportunity and from the inside look like limitations, always. But man, what a team to launch me into an administrative career. I mean, I've been really, really blessed with mentors all along the way who just have been ridiculously generous.
As have I. Yeah.
I laugh thinking of that meeting where they were like, Cardinal will do it. Yeah, he'll do it. We should ask him.
I don't know if you know how I got to Ohio University. I did the ERDAs. I really wanted to go to Yale, but I didn't think, I'm like, who am I to think I could be a director at Yale? But I want to research all the schools that have faculty who graduated from Yale. Do you know this? Do you know this story?
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, and this was back when you had to get those Peterson's catalogs. You couldn't just get on the internet. So I got the Peterson's catalogs and I, just did my research and heavy duty research and found out that a large proportion of Yale grads were teaching at Ohio University. And so I think actually Jorge Cachero said that they had already offered 2 men to be directing grad students because they always chose 2 at Ohio. I'd been taking acting lessons at the time with Bruce Katzman, who went to Yale at the same time as you and Jorge. He wrote me a letter of reference. And Jorge said, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you just don't really have any directing experience. I'd done a few new plays, which has become my passion, but because people ask me to as an actor, and they're like, oh, will you do this play? Oh, sure. And I said, maybe I'll come visit in case, someone declines. And he goes, that does happen sometimes. Come visit. And I drove my little self from Chicago to Ohio University, like, please pick me. And I think by the end of that visit, he was like, yeah, you got a spot. And the other guy they picked that was not Robert Ross Parker didn't come.
I think that's a great lesson. First of all, don't count yourself out ever.
Right.
Like somebody's going to get into the program that you want to go to. So it might as well be you.
Exactly.
I think the self-selecting out is always a mistake. Don't turn down jobs you don't have. If you think you want a job, go for it.
Yeah.
It might as well be you. The worst thing that happens is you don't get it, but you've met all these people along the way who might get you another job, who might get you in. And if it's not yours, it's not yours. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer in you just set up as many doors as possible to walk through and then see which one's open.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're going to college or applying for jobs, it might as well be you. Feel it out, send some energy toward various things, and then let things happen. I think people get in a rut when they're like, I'm stuck in my job or I'll never go to a good school. That is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And it's partly because you've made no energetic or actual action toward achieving any goals, let alone the one you want. Knock and see what happens. And I think both of us are talking about how our naivete actually serves that. If you don't know better, you're willing to try.
Yeah.
And I think some of us just get too smart, and especially as you get older, you just get too darn smart for your own good.
Yeah.
Just, relax.
I think too, you've always said to me, and I think of this often, just plant seeds. And people think if I plant these seeds here, it will equal this thing. But it doesn't work like that.
No.
The effort and action of planting the seeds will let something grow. It may not be the thing you're expecting, but the next door, like you said, will open. Those are mixed metaphors, but you get the idea. You've said that a lot.
Well, and I think of it in relation to your question. Sorry if I'm going to ruin the order of your questions, but
no, it's okay. You know my questions.
Your have you made it question.
Yeah.
I always think about this in terms of what you're talking about, because I think goals are great. Like, I have a whole bunch of students right now at Michigan who have a very realistic expectation that they're going to end up on Broadway, and they probably will.
Yeah.
But I don't think the goal is why they end up on Broadway. I think the goal just organizes things for them, and it happens that that's the outcome. And I always use this metaphor, which is if I go to Paris and I say I want to see the Eiffel Tower, that's my goal. And that's a worthy goal. The Eiffel Tower is amazing. But I leave my little hotel, and I stop and I see a bookstore, and I wander around this amazing bookstore, and I have the best coffee I've ever had. And I run into somebody else on the way, and we sit down in a cafe and have a great croissant. And I get a little lost, but I see a garden. And at the end of the day, on my way to the Eiffel Tower, I don't get to see the Eiffel Tower. It's closed. That is not a bad day.
Yeah.
That's a really successful day. And the Eiffel Tower served its purpose. It put me on the journey to have the day that was my day. And so I think allowing your goals to organize some of your thinking and where you go, but don't define your success or failure based on the goal. Define it on the quality of the journey, which is nothing new to say, but really respect that your journey is perfect and that the lessons are on the journey and that the goals are just there to give you something to aim at.
To organize around it, yeah. So then, how do you answer the question, have you made it, Vince?
Well, I just don't buy the paradigm.
Okay.
I make it every day. I've made it. Yes, I make it every day.
Yes.
Still here, still doing it.
Still making it.
And I think part of that too for me is if you really look at like how things have happened for me, it's just like, how did you end up directing an off-Broadway gig? Well, the energy was just sort of going in that direction. A friend called, they needed something, that was happening. I said yes to that, so I got that gig, which then led to this other gig. But none of it was planned. None of it was thoughtful, to be honest. It was all just sort of riding the waves. And so if you to use another metaphor, we are just metaphor thick tonight.
We're the best.
But if you're in the water and you're riding the waves, catch the waves that are coming. Don't sit there waiting for a wave that is the perfect wave.
Yeah.
Just keep catching them. And I think a lot of it is people will think better of me if I do this, or I will be happy if I do this perfect thing. And really, that's not what it's about. So follow that energy and let yourself be successful every day.
That's good advice. So what has your biggest risk been along the way?
I only know the risks in retrospect because I never thought of them at the time.
Well, you've heard me say on this podcast before, I don't think artists or creatives register risk the same way as others.
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, I quit a tenure track job at a university to go run Circle Rep School, which was, economically a real risk and really stupid. If, in fact, I was just doing building blocks of this leads to this, leads to this, because even at that time, getting a tenure track job was no mean feat. Quitting my job as a high school teacher. I quit my job as a high school teacher before I had a graduate program to go to.
Okay.
Those kind of moves where you're like, oh, it's time to move now.
Mm-hmm.
And you just know it in your gut that it's time to move on, and you just do, and then things are there.
So leap and the net will appear. There's my metaphor.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I also think sometimes it doesn't appear.
And that's okay too?
Yeah. I feel like I think part of it is this. I had an opportunity to be really poor for a while. And of course, I had parents who would bail me out at any point. So, when I say really poor, I mean within the context of my privilege.
Mm-hmm.
But I was living on, like, if I pay half of the electric bill, they won't shut off the electric because they won't figure it out that I've only paid half in time before the next bill's due. It was that kind of strategizing. So I was working the system to survive, and I was just fine.
What was your backup plan? Did you have one?
This question, and I've thought of this ever since you named your podcast. You have to have a plan in the first place to have a backup plan.
Good.
And I've had no plan.
See, I think people who know you would think you have it all worked out and all planned out.
I really don't. I really
I
don't.
believe that.
I
I
really
believe that.
don't. I guess I start in certain jobs, I start getting itchy and I think, oh, I'm not as good at this right now as I should be. I bet you that's a sign that I should start looking to go somewhere where I'm going to be of service in a better way.
Hmm.
That what I'm doing and where I am in my life right now will serve better. And so that's my itch.
I just keep thinking about that idea of you not really having a plan, but you seemingly on the outside to others appear to be someone who has it all put together. And I feel like that was my perception, perception is reality, perception of you early on, but I've known you for we won't say how long, but like a long time now. And I don't see you as that anymore at all. I see the person who eats cake for breakfast, like too many espressos, who also mows the lawn in khakis and a button-down shirt. Now, I don't know if you really mow the lawn like that, but in my head, driving past your house in Athens, Ohio, when I was still a grad student, you were mowing the lawn in khakis and a button-down shirt. Is that true?
No, but I think that's actually important. Because I think when you have a leadership position like I have since you've known me, that you serve a function in people's lives. And part of that function for what I do is sort of like, I'm going to be a pretty consistent adult in your world during this time when I've agreed to fulfill that role for you. I think there's the persistence of vision, whatever you see somebody in the first time you see them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had people who I know when I was at the dorms at University of Miami, and we would have a 2 a.m. fire alarm, and I'd be standing in the lobby in sweatpants and a t-shirt saying, move along, move more quickly. And then the next day, I would hear someone say, Vince was in the lobby in a tie and suit jacket. And 2 a.m. You're lucky I remember to put on the sweatpants. And I buy that role. I think that's really important to be aware of when you're in a leadership position.
Yeah.
That's who you are to a group of people at a point in their life.
When we were both at the University of Miami, you served as a resident master, which means
that I lived in an apartment in the building with 1,000 freshmen. And there were 2 other faculty families living there at the same time. And you and your family, we lived in this dorm with all of these kids living on their own for the first time in their lives.
And the hurricanes.
The hurricanes, and also what people don't know is that kids learn to pop popcorn for the first time in the first 6 weeks of school. And so they would burn the popcorn, and then all the fire alarms would go off, and 1,000 kids would have to evacuate. And we would have to stand there and make sure they were leaving the building.
Yeah. I really want to ask about how students are different from the different kinds of institutions where you've worked. So like a very high level BFA where so many people hold Michigan up to be the premier musical theater training program in the United States. And there's these other kids who say, well, I'm here. I got to this program because I didn't get into that program. And you've been into a wide variety of programs. And I wonder if you have any gems to share about different programs and what that means about a student's journey in the profession.
What strikes me always, and this went back to when I was a high school teacher, and there was a year when I was substitute teaching, and sometimes I would be in really fancy pants schools, and sometimes I'd be in schools where the teachers were super committed, and sometimes schools where they were just surviving, some schools without money, some schools that, were doing great with no money. So I had the whole variety of schools. And what struck me then and what strikes me now is students are students are students. And they show up and they want to have a good day and they want to learn something. And everything on the way to that intention shapes their day for them. But they all tend to show up wanting to have a great day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that commonality and a mission to help create the context for them to have that great day and learn really makes every institution very similar at the end of the day. Now, I would say University of Michigan students end up showing up with some skill sets that other people just haven't had the opportunity to develop. So they tend to be working at a real high level of skill, but they're still kids.
And it might just be exposure sometimes. Like
Absolutely.
in the middle of Kansas, there's not a lot of exposure.
And I found at a place like Ohio University, which I loved, sometimes those kids were so hungry because they knew they didn't have the access to some of the skill building, and they were starving for it, which put them in classes and they were ready to go. And the level of their excelling was just so dynamic and so exciting. And the creativity they developed because they had to, because they didn't have things handed to them, was really remarkable. So there's students in every one of the contexts I've been in have risen to the occasion in the way that context sets them up for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason it looks so different on the outside is because a place like Michigan, with its trajectory toward a professional career and the community that has allowed that to happen, from the alumni through the support systems, those are observable, external, check the box. That's Broadway is what I'm aiming for. A movie star, I'm aiming for that. But the truth is, when I look at many of the other institutions I've worked at, there are incredibly accomplished, happy, fulfilled human beings that came out of those programs that don't so easily check a box.
Did you did listen to Maya Lynn Robinson's episode?
Oh, I wept during her episode.
Yeah.
And that's the story. But
13 years in HR.
Yes, but hungry and committed and still an artist. Didn't let context define her, let her define her.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I think there is a commonality of students across the board. And some things that are viewed as deficits in certain situations are actually the engine that propel students toward success. And some of the things that look from the outside like it gives somebody makes their life actually slows them down.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have our obstacles, we all have our assets, and every situation is slightly different. What I say and really firmly believe is we have great theater educators across the states. I think my peers are extraordinary. And it's not so much whether it's a fancy school with a fancy name. It's really about a student finding their place with a couple of educators, a peer group in a context where they can grow and excel. That's all that's important. And I would say, especially with the college search process, don't get too hung up on your ego because you'll miss your people.
Yeah.
You'll miss your teachers. Don't say that's my number one school. I've got to get in there and then my life will be happy. That's just absolutely not true.
Yeah.
Meet the teachers, meet the students, and start finding the place where you can grow, where you can fail. And that will be your success. That's the journey from your hotel to the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
But don't let the Eiffel Tower mess up your journey.
It's interesting when we go to recruit for Kansas State. So we're a BA/BS program. We don't even have a BFA. And I'm taught at both. But all of our acting faculty are equity actors, film credits, TV credits, Broadway. I mean, all of us have been in the room many, many times and have chosen to be educators, which is a great place to be because they want to be there. We can't get the kids who go, I want to be a FA. And you think, well, do you know what we can offer you? I just want a BFA. And I have a BFA. I think it's a great thing. It's not for everyone. And I think you're right. You miss your people if you get so hung up on something that you don't really know about necessarily.
And I think for most people, the BA is the best degree because it helps you find your way. It gives you the broader launching pad that you need and that is appropriate to your age. I'm a big BA believer. And then I think of like at Kansas State. I mean, Tim Miller, I met at Kansas State because Kansas State did one of my plays and brought me in as a guest artist long before you were even probably in college.
Yeah.
and you know, for me, a place like a Kansas State where people are doing new work, they're doing new plays. But I think it's important to not treat this as a consumer transaction. Going to college is not getting the best deal on Amazon. Going to college is really about finding a context for 4 incredible years of personal development, artistic development, and educational development. And if you think you're buying a degree that gets you in a movie or on Broadway, you're going to be disappointed no matter where you go. But if you think this is 4 years for me to be on a journey of growth and discovery with people who are of like mind and experts in areas that I admire, you're on the right path. Now, where is that and who are your people?
When I think about this question we talked about a little bit earlier, see it to be it, you said your parents, you saw them as educators. Are there other people along your path that you had to see in order to be who you are today?
Even 10, 15 years ago, if you would have asked me, were your parents in the arts or inspired you in the arts, I would have laughed and said no. But in retrospect, I realized that both of my parents were these wildly creative people. My father retired, talk about risk-taking, at 50 years old to create his own business. My mom, this elementary school teacher, would set up her classroom with all these locations that were like little sets that students could interact with. And I saw all that and didn't recognize it as something special. I just thought that's how you interacted with the world. I saw it all the time. I just didn't know what it was. And then the other part of that was in my path were these incredible theater people from 8 years old on. And one in particular, James Thornton, was a really complicated man. But one of the things he would say and do is he'd say, "Oh, I want you to direct this show." And I would say, I have never directed a show. And he'd say, "Well, you're a director." And then I would just figure it out.
Early believers.
Yes. And so he certainly saw in me things that I never knew I could do or believed I was. And I think finding the people who maybe they're a little crazy and they see it, but they see it. Mm-hmm. Let that be heard.
Yeah, I love that whole belief system and who are those people willing to believe in you. Sometimes it's parents and sometimes it's not. I've been reflecting on the moment we're in right now, and I'm curious to know if there are things that you're doing. I mean, as a fellow educator too, I'm always thinking about this. Are there things that you're doing in your sphere to create a more inclusive environment?
Yes, this is kind of the most exciting point since 1968.
I think so too.
That we get to have the conversation again, and we have enough energy behind it to keep moving it along. Even if in our rehearsal rooms or in our programs we are diverse, and I think I could point to Michigan, we're very diverse. It's not enough if we don't start creating a generation who will change the paradigms and the expectations of how our theater looks and operates. We don't uncover those sneaky aspects of racism and exclusion that we just think, oh, well, that's just how things are. I see it up and down from our expectations of the work-life balance for artists. I see it in the racial distribution. I see it in the expectations of our language and how we speak to each other. And so it may be, it is uncomfortable for people who have been very successful teaching students how to fit into the construct that is, to have an economically successful life there. But by doing that, you're perpetuating it.
Mm-hmm.
I think this push is big enough that we can keep leaning into it. We have to change the future while we deal with the present.
I hope there's some real change there, and I'm glad to know you're doing it at Michigan. They're focusing on it as well.
The other part of all of this kind of work is not to be so afraid of doing something wrong that you're frozen in doing anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody wiser than I am said, we judge other people on their actions and ourselves on our intentions. And, I think we will try to keep the grace of looking at people through as what do they intend, and how do we help those actions get reoriented toward the better intention.
Yeah, good.
I want to say something else about the pandemic. Well, so my crystal ball has been broken since like March 10th. So it's very cloudy. But here's what I'm concerned about. And I want to sort of say these things into the universe so we do better. I think we're going to want to get back to normal so much when we can. I don't want to go back to the old normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it will be tempting to breathe a sigh of relief and have a big backslide. And I think we in leadership positions have to not allow it, even though it's going to be so much more comfortable to just say, oh, this is like it used to be. We can never go back to how it used to be.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable.
What's your advice for these students, the ones who have just graduated from college, going, what I'm entering a profession that currently doesn't exist? What's your advice for them?
I think you have to acknowledge that we are in a global pandemic and simultaneously a social revolution. This is hard. It's stressful for everyone around those students as well as those students. So that's really the water we're swimming in. And sometimes it's hard to recognize because, like the fish in the water, it's what we breathe, sleep, eat, it's what we're in. But when you're feeling weird and you feel like things are not the way they should be, this is not fitting, that's true. That's just a fact. Mm-hmm. And so not to say I'm wrong because I feel this, to say my barometer is right on. I'm a healthy human being who is recognizing what's going on around me.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I'm not broken. I'm okay.
Yeah.
So then look at the things you can change. And I think we all get in trouble when we start spinning in the juices of this isn't how this should be. This isn't what was supposed to happen. This isn't what I thought was going to happen. That loop, it takes you nowhere.
Yeah.
Instead, looking at what is happening and where's the good that could happen in it. What is cool here? What are the opportunities? And you can have your moments of morning prom and morning that, like the freshman walking through the gate on campus. You're not having that. You can mourn that. But then let it go. Because now that's part of your experience. Part of your experience is that it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you didn't have the experience and now that's somehow magically erased, like Men in Black who have hit the pen and said nothing happened. No, something happened and you missed it. And that's an experience in and of itself. So the absence of these traditions that you actually get to experience doesn't mean nothing's happening to you. It's all happening.
Yeah.
So metabolize it. Make it part of your history. It's part of your story now. That's how you started your freshman year. Gather what's really happening as your real journey and trust the journey. It's not what any of us thought. So you are writing on blank pages.
Yeah.
Make it a good story. Make it a journey that's worthy of everything that's led up to it. you can make this time worthy. And that is not for me bogusly being Shakespeare and writing King Lear during an epidemic. None of that's true. It is, today I have made it worthwhile. And that might be, I actually noticed that there was a sunset today. That might be worth it. That might be what you can do today. But another day, you might help your friend write a song.
Mm-hmm.
You might just be a really good audience for somebody else. But make it count in the way you can and take your journey.
Yeah.
It's okay. I am the kind of person who doesn't think missing a day of school, a week of school, or even a couple of months of school is a loss. I think it's part of your journey, and the lessons that are there are just as valuable as your school lessons.
I have to tell you, Vince, I stole something from you, and I use it all the time, and my students who are listening will recognize it as mine, but it's not mine, it's yours.
And it's actually probably somebody else's.
Probably. You can tell me whose it was before you, because we just keep recycling the same good information, hopefully. So I tell students, and they can recite it, I say it so much, that our priorities are your health, mental and physical, your family, however you define it, and your education. And we will make our decisions based on those priorities, knowing that we're in charge of your education. But if your health and your family are not in order, we care about those before we care about your education, right? Stolen straight from you. How did I do?
Hallelujah and amen. Well, and I'll tell you that for me was a response to the culture I grew up in, where it was the show must go on, and you dance on that broken foot and you pretend that family member didn't die, and you do all this crazy stuff because the show must go on. And I just don't agree.
Same.
I do think that families and people sacrifice to get a student into school. And part of that is an agreement that we're going to arrange things so the demands of your family are lesser, because we've decided for this time to prioritize school, and that you've taken care of your health, and that if you're here, it's because you're healthy. And if you need to be gone to take care of your health, you're gone, and you'll come back when it's time.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to navigate that for students who were trying to make the show go on as if, for 4 years you could pretend you didn't have other things in your life, that's where that came from for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do believe it and try to live by it, although that programming from being a kid in theater is really hard to break for me. It's not hard to break when I'm talking to somebody else.
Yeah.
But there are days that I don't follow that advice, and I should.
Yeah. I try to say it to faculty as well.
Yes.
Do you still say it at Michigan?
Yeah. And in fact, on Friday, we will have our first all-department meeting on Zoom, and I will say exactly what you said. I also think in leadership, you shouldn't be a wild card.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't guess how you're going to react because they know what you value, you haven't done your job.
Yeah, if I sound like a broken record, that's a good thing.
Yes, and if you can say, well, Vince is going to say my health is more important, that's good.
Yeah.
Your values need to be clear if you're going to be a leader.
Well, I stole that from you, so thank you.
Happy to have it stolen.
So anything you can recommend that you're reading right now or watching or listening to?
I have been just podcast crazy. Obviously, Ditch Your Backup Plan.
Thank you.
In the show business world, there's a podcast called Guys Who Like Musicals,
Mm-hmm.
which is really interesting. They interview people who are in musicals and talk. It's a lot of behind the scenes kind of conversations, which I love actors, so I love hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
1619 Project, the podcast.
Oh, so good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in tandem with that, watching the 13th those are good together, because you get this breadth of historical oppression and horror that helps you see the bigger picture. Mucho, mucho, mucho amore, the Walter Mercado documentary is fabulous.
Yes.
And really fun. I love documentaries, so I drop into documentaries a lot.
We have such similar taste in many things, including documentaries and podcasts and pizza and cake. But
yeah.
So let me ask this final question. So Vince, if people want to connect with you, how can people get a hold of you?
You can easily find my email online. Also, I have a website, vincecardinal.com. And mostly I'm on Instagram. I'm there under my name, but mostly you can find what I'm doing under UMich Musical Theater.
Vince, thank you so much for your time.
What a pleasure, and what a fan I am, and I can't wait to hear all the new DYBPs.
I'm Jen Valenga, and this is the DYBP Podcast. If you're getting value out of the podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show. It would mean so much to me. If you've already done that, follow me on Instagram, DYBP_podcast. And if you're on TikTok, Gen X, Gen V. I'll be doing some more videos once the semester ends. Next week, it's a Just Jen episode with Ditch Fear and Take Risks.
If we could be eating pizza while we do it.
No, I just like cake.
It's really important.
It is.
I just had cake before we started. I had a cup of coffee and cake for dinner.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for listening. I could talk to you all day and have many times.
You know what I was thinking in terms
What?
of our story? That PJ was born while we were at Hecht,
Mm-hmm.
and now he's
Looking at college.
looking at colleges, and that's mind-blowing. That's
Yeah.
just mind-blowing to me. You don't need to put this in the podcast. But
No, I
it did make
had
me
this
think,
thought.
oh,
I don't know what made me think of it the other day. Maybe it was because I knew I was interviewing you, but I was like, remember that faculty club with the food and the lunch? And when I was pregnant, I was so sick and I couldn't make, and I love to cook. I cook a ton,
yeah.
but I couldn't cook for myself. And so I think you would just be like, come on, we're going to go. You would just make sure I ate. Like, we're going to go to I'll take all this out. But
yeah, well, I would say in my entire career, making sure people eat has been actually equal across the board.
that's good to know. That's good.
But I remember John and I were talking about you and Dean had the flu.
When we had PJ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the hospital room and you were both still so sick.
And you had to take one of the cars back to the dorm.
We were taking and I was in the narrative in my head was, are they hearing the doctors? Like, are they hearing, because he was jaundiced.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I have to get to a doctor and hear this to make sure everything they're telling me is accurate. Because when you're sick and you've just had a baby, and I remember he was laying in my hand.
Yes, he was teeny.
The top of his head went from here and his foot went to here.
Yeah,
he
absolutely. He did. Tiny.
And the doctor came in and I'm holding him and I'm grilling the doctor. and I'm having this feeling like this poor kid is feeling this energy of this guy who's grilling the doctor, but can't put him down. It was
Well,
one of those-
he kept, well, now I know his personality, but he had to have those little jaundice goggles on, and he kept pushing them off
I
at,
know.
a month early, and he just kept pushing the goggles off. And Grandma Linda finally came to keep them on his eyes during those little lights so that Dean and I could leave for a hot second.
I
Oh,
know. Well, and Linda, thank God, like
yeah.
she was just going to
Good.
make it work.
Good one. Yep.
Yeah.
Now that child is almost 6 feet. Yep.
Well, and talk about having the people in your path when you need them.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
all of that craziness, and she just kind of dropped into that world.
I know. Grandma Linda. She's still Grandma Linda.